Every year with this event, we attempt to inspire and motivate everyone to continue to focus on diversity as our strength. I really believe that only by incorporating this principle completely in our ideals and values as a university can we truly become excellent and serve as a model for the universities of tomorrow. As a university, we are embracing our unique opportunity to lead in some of the dialogue around issues of equity and inclusion, as well as how we serve the nationally emerging majority. We know that last year's statistics indicate that students of color overwhelmingly enrolled in colleges and universities. UNM looks today like most universities will look like tomorrow. Our provost, Chowki Abdallah, is very mindful of who we are as an institution, and it has been through his effort and support that we will have a 2-year dialogue on implicit bias, unconscious bias, and microaggressions. Today's event and keynote speaker will kick off the beginning of this dialogue series. And what we plan to do is not just have speakers come and talk at us, and provide us with information, but we also plan to have some very serious conversations, talking circles, if you will, so that we can gain better understanding. I want to thank Provost Abdallah for making this a kickoff event and a 2-year plan for how we have these very important and yet difficult conversations at this institution. I've already been to Dr. Su's presentation this morning, and I will tell you that those of us that were there this morning kept nodding, in agreement with many of the comments that he had to make. He's going to share some very important messages with us, as I've said before. And we're going to provide you with an opportunity to ask some questions. So be thinking of questions that you might ask him. We have about a 15-minute period for question and answer. In addition, we're going to recognize our Luminaria awardees. These are individuals that are doing amazing work on our campus and in the community to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. We also have an inaugural award this year for advancing inclusion, access, and student success. As a university, we have to be mindful that we have to ensure that our students are successful when they come here. So this is a very important award. And of course, every year, we have our Inclusive Excellence Award. And so you can see in your program who some of these awardees will be. At the end of the event, last year, if you recall, we had an equity and inclusion survey that we administered, the first time ever that this kind of survey has been disseminated on this campus. We had an overwhelming response. And the participation of those of you that are here was so important. We also had prizes to engage participation. And so at the end, we're going to name the prize winners of the iPad minis, the iPod nanos, the $500 tuition waivers, those kinds of things. So we wish that we could have given everyone who participated and provided us with information. We have just received the results for the survey, and we're going to be sharing those with you very soon. A lot of people took time to really provide us with feedback, and so we have a quantitative and a qualitative part of the survey that we're anxious to share. Our consultant will be coming back in December, at that time, we will launch the sharing of that information. I now would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Derald Wing Sue. Dr. Sue can be described as a pioneer in the field of multicultural psychology, multicultural education, multicultural counseling and therapy, and the psychology of racism and anti-racism. He has done extensive multicultural research and writing in psychology and education long before the academic community perceived it favorably. And his theories and concepts have paved the way for a generation of young scholars interested in issues of minority mental health and multicultural psychology. He is author of over 150 publications, 17 books, and numerous media productions. In all of these endeavors, his commitment to multiculturalism has been obvious, and his contributions have forced the field to seriously question the monocultural knowledge base of its theories and practices. As evidence of his professional impact, Dr. Sue's book, Counseling the Culturally Diverse, Theory and Practice, published again in 2013, 6th edition, has been identified as the most frequently cited publication in the multicultural field. Since the first edition, it has been considered a classic and used by nearly 50% of the graduate counseling psychology market. With the help of many colleagues, he chaired committees for the Society of Counseling Psychology and the Association for Multicultural Counseling and Development that resulted in laying the foundation for the cultural competency movement in the delivery of mental health services to an increasingly diverse population. I now turn it over to Dr. Derald Wing Sue.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me make sure that the PowerPoint slides are being put up at this point. What I'm going to be sharing with you this morning or this afternoon is the research and work that I've done in terms of racial, gender, and sexual orientation microaggressions. And we can ask the question of is this not working? Testing, testing. Can you all hear me now? Is it better? What I'm going to do is try to share with you the work that I've been doing on microaggressions. And we can ask the question, what are microaggressions? Well, microaggressions are the everyday slights, put-downs, and validations and indignities directed at socially marginalized groups because of their marginalized status by well-intentioned individuals who are unaware that they are delivering these slights and invalidations that are directed towards them. As I've mentioned, almost any group can be the object of microaggressions if they are marginalized in terms of our society. There are three examples I'd like to use to introduce you to this issue of microaggressions. Years ago, and continuing even to today, I remember one time when I was asked to keynote an address in Washington, D.C., and I flew into Dulles Airport, got into a cab, and the cab driver began to engage me in a conversation. And this was some times back when the heavyweight championship fight between Mike Tyson and Holyfield. Do you remember that fight where he bit off a piece of Tyson's ear? Well, I'm a fight fan, so that in the cab we were really talking about it. And the cab driver turned to me and said, well, what is it that you do? And I said, well, I'm a psychologist. And he said that, well, what would motivate an individual to bite off a piece of a person's ear? And being psychologically minded, I said many reasons, in terms of, which is something my wife hates about me. She'll ask me, and I'll say, well, there could be a number of explanations for that. But we had this pleasant conversation, and I remember that when he dropped me off at the hotel, I got out of the cab, paid him, gave him a tip, and he turned to me and says that, you speak excellent English. And I said, thank you, I hope so, I was born here. Now, this is an example of something that I want you to keep in mind, because that very same evening, after I delivered the address, you know how people from the audience come up and want to talk to you about these issues. One white woman came up to me and said that was really an enlightening address, and she flattered and complimented me. And we started a conversation about some of the research and work she was doing. And she, therefore, after a while, began to ask me, well, Dr. Sue, where were you born? And I said, oh, I was born in Portland, Oregon. And she said, no, where were you born? And I was, Portland, Oregon? I was, was this, and then she said, no, what country were you born in? And I said, the United States. And she turned she got embarrassed, turned beet red, thanked me, and excused herself from the platform and left. Now, these are typical examples of what I now know and label as microaggressions, because on the surface, they seem to be flattering comments. On the part of the cab driver, he was flattering me. He was complimenting me for my English. On the second end, with a woman wanting to know where I was born, she was trying to make a personal connection and showing interest in me in a personal level. But the hidden communication, the meta communication, is that you are a perpetual alien in your own country. And these are types of microaggressions that many Latinos, Latinas, and Asians experience in their day-to-day activities. And the hidden communication is that you are not a true American because you don't look like what Americans should look like. And this is in the unconscious a worldview of the individual that is delivering it. Microaggressions aren't necessarily verbal or simply nonverbal. For example, when President Barack Obama says that when a black man like me walks into an elevator, the white woman present clutches a purse more carefully, the meta-communication is that you are a criminal and likely up to no good in one way or another. They can be verbal, nonverbal, but they are also environmental. And this is where it is very powerful for us to understand the manifestation of microaggressions. I shared with the group this morning an incident that happened to me in which I was invited to Harvard University to participate several years ago, to participate in their program, a week-long program aimed at making Harvard a more welcoming campus for students of color, faculty of color, and staff of color. And my role during this entire event, they had public forums, seminars, food, service, a lot of different things to celebrate it. My role was to conduct a workshop and training with the same theme for all the deans of Harvard University. It was a half-day to full-day affair. And as I was being introduced in the morning by the moderator, I scanned and looked at the room, and all of the top-level administrators, to me, appeared to be primarily white men. There were women, all right, who were white women, but they were generally the assistants or associate deans that were present. And I toyed with the idea of raising that issue when I was introduced, and I did. I said, as I stand before you today and look across the room here, all of you appear white. unless I'm wrong. And there was uncomfortable shifting about that was going on. And I said to them, do you know the message that is being sent if I am a faculty, a potential faculty of color that you are trying to recruit, or if the students of color that you want to attend Harvard are being recruited, what is the message that is being sent off there? And I said, there are 3 messages that are being sent to faculty, students and staff, and maybe even administrators of color. 1, you are not welcome here. 2, if you choose to come here, you will not be comfortable here. 3, if you stay and persist, there is only so far up at Harvard University that you can go. These are the hidden meta-communications of microaggressions that are directed towards individuals when they see this sea of primarily white men having these top-level positions. And there is nothing wrong with being a white man. What I'm trying to indicate is a hidden message, intended or not, that is being sent to individuals of color. Afterwards, after my presentation, one of the deans came up to me and made an observation, and he said that, you know, we do all our new faculty orientation in our faculty club, and in the room that we do it are full-scale portraits of every president ever of Harvard University. And except for now that there's a woman president, they were all full-scale portraits of men. And he was saying, he asked me, do you think this has an impact on faculty of color that we are trying to recruit? And I said, what do you think? Because in essence, there is a powerful communication that is being sent. And these are the hidden forms of communication that oftentimes occur. Microaggressions occur throughout our interactions with one another. I would say that probably that there are many of you people of color attending this particular luncheon who has already experienced a few microaggressions that other people might not be aware of. Now, let me try to categorize this more in terms of reading this particular statement that was given by one of the participants. And if I can look at it, it gets so tiring, you know. It sucks you dry. People don't trust you. From the moment I, an African-American male, wake up, I know stepping out the door that it will be the same day after day. The bus can be packed, but no one will sit next to you. I guess it may be a good thing because you always get more room. No one crowds you. You get served last. When they serve you, they have this phony smile and just want to get rid of you. You have to show more ID to cash a check. You turn on the TV, and there you always see someone like you being handcuffed and jailed. They look like you, and sometimes you begin to think it is you. You are a plague. You try to hold it in, but sometimes you lose it. Explaining doesn't help. They don't want to hear. Even when they ask, why do you have a chip on your shoulder? Shit, I just walk away now. It doesn't do any good explaining. Now, these are questions that are central to our understanding about the psychological dynamics of microaggressions. Is life as hard as this black man describes? Is life as hard as many people of color try to explain to their white brothers and sisters about what is happening to them? Is he exaggerating or misreading the actions of others? People of color, when they raise issues of bias, are often told that they are exaggerating, insensitive, or paranoid. Is he right in concluding that others don't want to listen to his explanations? You know, when you try to explain what this is, I oftentimes feel cut off unheard in terms of that they don't want to pursue this. Why is he so angry and resentful? Do you believe him or not? If not, what are your reasons? And we are now dealing very shortly with what I call a clash of racial realities, where the racial realities of many white Americans are totally different from the racial realities of people of color. And it is this clash that makes it very difficult for people to understand one another. Microaggressions occur constantly. Let's talk about I'm going to skip this. This is a discussion, a sharing by a Chinese-American journalist of how he is oftentimes mistaken for a food delivery person. And he can't understand this going on. But if I can do it, these are 3 examples of microaggressions that President Barack Obama experienced when he was explaining after the George Zimmerman trial. As you recall, he was very upset, and in an impromptu speech came out and talked about black men and he experiencing car doors being locked when he walks across the street, being monitored at retail stores more carefully as a black man, and white women in elevators having fear of him, clutching their purses more carefully, clutching their pearls or jewelry to hide it, and so relieved when he leaves it. All of these are microaggressions, and the meta-communication is that black men are angry, violent, criminal-prone, untrustworthy, likely up to no good. And what, in an indirect way, that President Obama was trying to communicate with the public, which, by the way, if you go to the blogs after this informal speech of his, how hard they were on President Obama, that he should be president of everyone, just not a black America. And, you know, they were very critical of these statements. And these are the meta-communications that people of color experience in their day in and day out lives. The thing about microaggressions is that on the surface, anyone may appear harmless, trivial, and small slights. But people who deliver them don't realize that people of color, women, LGBT brothers and sisters experience them day in and day out. From the moment of birth, people of color are subjected to microaggressions, and anyone may represent breaking the camel's back. And what my white brothers and sisters oftentimes don't see is the cumulative nature. They see that I have gotten angry over this small, trivial incident, but that incident has a chain of activities that are connected towards the harm that comes here. To give you some idea, other things that in politics, if you are a political nut like I am, I watch programs all the time. When Barack Obama and Joe Biden were running for the Democratic nomination, do you remember that? When Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were the only individuals who were running against a sea of white men for the Democratic nomination. Barack Obama had come out and announced that he was running for the nomination. Joe Biden followed with his announcement. And newscasters came up to him immediately and asked him directly, why are people so excited about the Barack Obama's candidacy? And this was what he said when asked by newscasters, a direct quote. Quote, I mean, you got the first mainstream African-American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man, end quote. People could not, there were African-Americans and organizations who felt offended by this comment. Now, I want you to realize that Joe Biden, and we all know he's the vice president now, that if you look at his historical record, he has been a friend and ally of civil rights. But even despite this, he was prone to microaggressions that lie or are embedded in his worldview. And people could not understand why Black Americans, some Black Americans, found this an offensive statement. And I think for purposes of time, what we can conclude is just to ask the question in reverse. You mean that there's never been a mainstream African American who is articulate and bright, clean and nice looking? This microaggression is directed at the fact that Barack Obama is an exception. Do you see that? He's an exception. He's not like what blacks are generally. It allows Biden and unconsciously to cling tenaciously on to a stereotype of black men and say that however blacks are generally as a rule like this. Now, I don't want to be accused of bias here, so let's now switch to Republicans. And we can ask now about John McCain. When he ran against Barack Obama, he was accused of being, being stiff and not being able to hold town hall meetings. And some of you have seen this over in news media over and over, where John McCain held these town halls and walked out and to talk to the people, exchanging microphones. At a political rally, a supporter told McCain, quote, and this is an elderly white woman, you can think back, and I can't give you the nonverbal descriptions or how she said it, but she said, quote, I don't trust Obama, he's, and she groped for the word and finally said Arab. I think that she was trying to say he's a terrorist, a Muslim. This was McCain's response, again, seemingly admirable. He said, McCain shook his head, quickly took the microphone and said, no, ma'am, he's a decent family man, a citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with, he's not. Boy, here's McCain jumping to the defense of Barack Obama. Yet something about this statement didn't feel good. And I was trying to figure this out, and it was only the following morning on Meet the Press that Colin Powell said that what McCain should have said was that, no, ma'am, he's not. But if he were, what would be wrong with that? Behind this is that Arabs are not decent family. They occur so fast that they impact the mindset and perception of individuals that are going on. Microaggressions can be defined as commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities that may be intentional or unintentional. Our research deals with the unintentional ones because in my work with people of color, I find that they are better adapted to deal with overt expressions of racism from skinheads, white supremacists, than the liberal, well-intentioned individual where you can't determine whether they are or aren't biased against you. They communicate hostile, derogatory, negative racial slights to an individual or group because of their status. Microaggressions are stunning. They occur very quickly. And by the time you think about, well, did what I think happened really happen? How should I respond? By the time you even begin to think about how responding, the situation is over. And it leaves you in another land about dealing with what might be going on here. Microaggressions are brief, everyday exchanges that can occur to people with your family, with neighbors, in the classroom, and so forth. And the perpetrator generally is unaware that they have delivered a microaggression. In our studies of classroom dynamics that are going on, we find, for example, that well-intentioned white professors and white students are, while they might want to deal with what might be occurring in the classroom, they are unaware that what has occurred is a microaggression. And when you don't have critical consciousness of what is going on, you cannot intervene to correct it in one way or another. These are examples of racial microaggressions. A black student is complimented by a professor, just like with Barack Obama. John, a black male student, a professor says that, white professor says that is the most insightful, articulate statement. Can't understand why the black student finds it offensive. It's almost like, it's surprising. You mean blacks can, in actuality, be intelligent and insightful? That's the impact that they think here. Third generation Asian American students is complimented by a white classmate for speaking excellent English. Or in some sense, they are, my Asian students tell me that oftentimes white students will turn to them and speak extra slow, as if they need to process and understand this. Again, the message is that you're an alien in your own country here. Here's a gender microaggression. And this was given by someone at the medical school, Columbia Medical School. A female resident, a physician wearing a stethoscope, is mistaken by medical students as a nurse. And the message here is that women cannot make decisions and occupy, nor are they competent to occupy higher level positions here. Male students in private can refer to a female professor as a bitch while describing their male counterparts as a forceful, assertive leader in one sense. In my work with Fortune 400 companies, this comes across all the time with women who say that they are oftentimes, not stated, but implied that because they are assertive in wanting things done, they're seen as a bitch. While a white man who is equally forceful is seen as a forceful leader. A black man, however, is seen as angry and out of control. This is what goes on here. Microaggressions can also be related to sexual orientation. One of my doctoral students talks about, former doctoral students wrote a book called That's So Gay. You hear this in school situations all the time, where fellow students say, oh, that's so gay. They're referring to a deviant behavior, abnormal behavior, or something that is strange and out of place. Now, this is really important. A lesbian client reluctantly discloses her sexual orientation to a straight counselor trainee by stating that she was, quote, into women, end quote. The counselor indicates he is not shocked by the disclosure because he once worked with a client who was, quote, into dogs, end quote. There is this, he's trying to reassure the client that he's comfortable dealing with these deviant types of behaviors. And this is really important. Other socially devalued groups, for example, my Jewish brothers and sisters, have heard this many times. When you're bargaining over something, you'll hear the statement, don't try to Jew me down. The stinginess, the message that is happening here. This is what some visually impaired and blind students talk about, that oftentimes when they're in class and they're introduced to a classmate, the classmate will come up and say, well, good morning, Robert. And the blind student will say, well, I can hear perfectly well, thank you. The message really here is a person with a disability is disabled and infantilized in all aspects of their functioning and behavior here. Here are some themes that faculty of color oftentimes express about the types of microaggressions that they find directed towards them. They experience the campus climate as isolating, alienating, extremely stressful, and invalidating. We're talking about a campus climate that invalidates faculty of color, students of color, and staff of color. And that's why, by the way, people don't understand when they talk about why are the black kids seated together in the cafeteria. It's because all groups have a need to practice and rehearse and validate their culture. The more that an institution is invalidating, the more clustering is likely to occur. The more you feel that your racial, cultural, ethnic identity is validated, the more you are likely to go out and meet and interact with people who are different than you. Another one is that they are likely to experience being the only one. And the experiencing being the only one is correlated with the higher you go up in the administrative or organizational hierarchy, the less other people like you occupy those particular positions. They lack mentors who possess knowledge of the minority experience. Assigning mentors don't do any good unless that mentor understands and shares your worldview. Oftentimes in organizations, you hear about white men have informal mentors all the time. But people of color and women lack mentors in organizations. They have their research and scholarship devalued and considered illegitimate. And this happens in business, this happens in academia during promotion and tenure. What is the type of research you do? Where is it published? That is only opinions and not as worthwhile as other types of studies. They have their racial or gender identities assailed. Derald, why do you always talk about yourself as Asian American? You're unique. We're all human beings. There is only one race, the human race. Without the understanding that you have invalidated and negated an important aspect of one's cultural, racial identity. And this happens frequently in organizations that strive for a colorblind philosophy. In fact, what we have found in studies is that organizations that are colorblind have lower productivity than those who value and value diversity in their functioning and work here. They experience elevated levels of stress and distress. You don't know oftentimes what it is like for a faculty of color. In my early years in California, I was the only, there was only one other faculty of color in a faculty in the psychology department of 20 faculty, almost all being white men. You don't know what it's like to have to always be constantly vigilant about what you say, how you're impacting, what are the consequences. It's very stressful in that particular environment. And then when you're using your psychological energies to survive in an invalidating situation, you don't have that energy for academic productivity, research, teaching. It really affects the type of productivity that you have. They are subjected to bias promotion and tenure decisions. There's a whole list of things that I can talk about in terms of this. They have many more students and colleagues question their qualifications or credentials to hold the status of professor. They will challenge, white students will challenge you in a classroom if you're a faculty of color. It will be very subtle. Faculty of color have told me that the challenges often comes that when they're talking about a content, white students will say, I can't find this in the book. Where are you getting that info? It's kind of communication about that you don't know the subject and that I don't accept what you say in terms of what is going on here. There are 6 basic assumptions. 12:15 is when we're supposed to end, and I'm supposed to have. There are really 6 basic assumptions. I'm going to go through this real quickly and then open it up for Q&A. That we have to begin to acknowledge that we have all been socialized into a society in which there exists individual, institutional, and societal biases. If you look at the history of the United States, it is the history of racism. How else would you explain the enslavement of Africans from Africa, the taking away of land of the indigenous people, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World? These are not just individual acts, they are systemic societal acts that have been given. And people get upset with me when I make that particular statement that the history of the United States is the history of racism. But in all good conscience and balance, the history of the United States is also the history of anti-racism. It is one of the few societies and nations in which individuals and groups have worked against racism. But that is one of the things. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means this, that none of us are immune from inheriting the racial, sexual orientation, gender biases of our forebears. To believe that I have been born and raised in the United States for all these decades without inheriting stereotypes, biases, and assumptions, I believe is the height of naivete or a lack of contact with reality. And this is the major battle that people have difficulty with, that we have been socialized in a society that indeed is biased and bigoted, and all of us have biases, and they may not be conscious or in our level of awareness, but when they are unaware, when you are unaware of the biases, that is when they are most likely to come out in the voting booths, in how you teach your children, in who you decide to hire, retain, or promote. Those hidden biases create the disparities that we see here. It is not old-fashioned racism. I don't want to meet a white supremacist on my own, alone in a darkened alley or something of that nature, but I have less fear of a white supremacist than I do of ordinary individuals who are unaware of the biases. And these are some statistics I want to share with you here. White Euro-Americans constitute only 33% of the population. They occupy 80% of tenured positions in higher education. They are 80% of the House of Representatives. It varies now. Over the past few years, between 80 to 90% of the US Senate. They are 92% of the Forbes 400 executive CEO level positions. They are 90% of public school superintendents. They are 99.9% of major athletic team owners. Now, it may be 100% because when I did this calculation, Marge Schott was owner of the Cincinnati Reds, and she has sold the team since that time. And this statistic should make us all feel good, right? They are now only 97.73% of US presidents. And I always say, unless there is something we do not know about Thomas Jefferson, that could alter the situation here. So the questions we should be asking is this: where are the women? Where are the people of color? It is not the old-fashioned racism by white supremacists that create these disparities that I'm sharing with you. They are ordinary folks, good, moral, decent individuals who go to church, who experience themselves as good people, who would never consciously discriminate, yet they are the ones that are making the decisions that create these particular disparities. Now, the characteristics, these are three other forms assumptions. The characteristics of these forms of bias are that they are invisible, unintentional, and subtle in nature. So if bias is invisible, you can't do anything about it. And so one of the goals that I oftentimes tell people is that the goal is to make the invisible visible. Microaggressions are invisible to perpetrators. They do not realize what they have done. In fact, they oftentimes will counteract that by saying, that was not my intention. You are misreading what I'm intending to happen here. Racial, gender, and sexual orientation microaggressions create psychological dilemmas for the perpetrator and the recipient. And I can't go into that. You can get it through the readings in terms of what internally happens to people of color when they experience a microaggression. Microaggressions create a hostile and invalidating climate. And here is where I want to say, end with this about the harmful impact controversy. All of the examples I've given you individually, in some sense, we can see in isolation are small, trivial types of things. Microaggressions are powerful because they are constant and continual. There is no endpoint to them. Microaggressions are cumulative in nature. They come out from the moment that we are born. Microaggressions must be psychological energy, has to be exerted to read decipher the message. The cab driver, the woman, they were flattering, complimenting me, but is that really the message that is being delivered to me? Microaggressions are constant reminders of a person's second-class status in this society. It symbolizes this. Microaggressions also symbolize, like I'm saying, past historic injustices. These are studies about the harmful impact of microaggressions, that they assail the mental health of recipients. They create a hostile and invalidating campus climate. They perpetuate stereotype threat. They create physical health problems and life expectancies and things of that nature. They saturate the broader society with cues that signal our devaluation. They lower productivity and problem solving in both the world of work and in education. They are responsible for creating inequities in education, employment, and healthcare. They, far from being benign slights, the conclusion is that they might be micro in nature, but they are macro in their impact on all of us. And thank you. I'm going to stop there and ask whether there are Q&As, there are questions, reactions, or comments that you might have. Thank you. Okay, yes.
Here is the dilemma. It's like asking someone, you're defensive. As soon as you say that, you're going to get defensive.
Yes.
So recently I was in a discussion with someone and he said, Yamane, said, you're angry. As soon as he said that, I got angry. So how do you deal with that? I mean, if you say something, then
yes.
You're engaging. If you don't say something,
that's right. And
then at some point, I can only imagine how it would feel like.
Yeah, this is, okay, This is a part of the psychological dilemmas the 4 psychological dilemmas that I point out, and that is that you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. When a microaggression occurs, in fact, I gave this as an example, a personal example, that oftentimes black women, when they raise an issue, they're seen as the angry black woman. The content of what they're saying is undermined by this. And yet, if you don't do anything, you stew away at it. I mean, I've experienced microaggressions in which I haven't done anything, or I didn't know what to do, and I leave that encounter and I assail myself. You're a coward. How can you be such a, so weak-willed in not bringing it up, so that you're damned if you do and damned if you don't? And for people of color to raise the question of microaggression enters into a power dynamic that in some sense, like I gave example this morning, a white male professor who commits a microaggression towards, let's say, a Latino student. The Latino student can raise the issue, but the consequences are great, that they will get a bad grade, be pathologized by the response that they're giving. Our studies now are looking at how do we respond to microaggressions, and there are 2 answers to that. One of them is that prevention is always better than remediation. So if you see it systemically, many of us may be lost already. In terms of we're the victims of a cultural, social conditioning that has already given us all these biases. I think that one of the ways systemically to address it is through pre-K through 12. If our educational curriculum, thank you, if our educational curriculum is truly multicultural, we nip the buds in the aftermath of many of the people that we have here. Now, that's ideal, but a goal that we should work towards. The other one is that how do we as people of color take care of ourselves when we experience a microaggression and educate the perpetrator? That's a very difficult thing to do, because when we first started the microaggression research studies, we found that we wanted to find out how we could educate perpetrators of microaggressions. The people of color that we studied didn't want to deal with that. They were saying that, look I'm hurting. How can you expect me to be educating someone? How do I take care of myself? How do I cope? And so part of our study was aimed at coping strategies for people who are targets of microaggressions. We're now focusing in on how we educate those people who deliver microaggressions, and it is more an art than a science. Let me give you an example. There's not a book where you can go and say, how do we respond? But one of the things you notice immediately is defensiveness that occurs in the individual. You can approach that defensiveness either overtly or subtly. Remember the cab driver who complimented me for speaking good English? In the past, I would explode, and he would have gotten defensive. I have learned, and this is the remark that I now make, thank you, I hope so, I was born here. What I have done is parceled out the meta-communications. Thank you is thanking his conscious self that complimenting me for speaking good English. However, I undermine that meta-communication by saying, I hope so because I was born here. And I'm thinking that hopefully I planted a seed that will replay sometime in other examples that occur throughout. There are other ways, a third way to deal with microaggressions, and that is to train, to get people to lower their defensiveness. And one way I do that is, in training, one way that I do that is to share from people how how I have developed personally, and I've been guilty of microaggressions myself. Now, by admitting to microaggressions you've experienced, it almost frees other individuals that he's equally vulnerable or equally, I don't want to say equally bad as I, so, they're willing to engage in that particular topic. And I oftentimes use the fears I have or had strongly about black men. And I can tell you a long story about this in academia, but I won't because we don't have that much time. The other thing is to own up the fact that you too have biases and prejudices, and it frees, and you use it as examples to open up the dialogue so that as a teacher, educator, or facilitator, to do that, you have to really be quite secure about who you are. When I was young, I could never do it because when a microaggression happened towards me or another student of color, a hot button would be pushed. I wouldn't feel like educating the white student. I would feel like taking a hammer and hitting them over the head, in terms of this. So that part of it is that you have to really be secure in who you are as a racial cultural being. And I find, for example, that many of my white brothers and sisters really are not comfortable with themselves as a racial cultural being. In fact, even if I ask them, what does it mean to be white? They have difficulty coping with that. If I was to ask you, what does it mean to be black? I think you would easily talk about what it was and engage in the dialogue. And whiteness is a default standard that is invisible to well-intentioned individuals. Geez, I'm going much longer. Should we have one more comment or question? If not, I can always share with you the example of over where? Over here?
Okay, so it's more of a testimonial, but I'm in the teacher education program here at UNM, and this very topic came up in one of my classes the other night in one of my methods courses, and it was surprising to me that most of the individuals in the room, and we're thinking around 30 individuals, I would say more than half had no idea of this concept of this unconscious microaggressions. And so it was shocking to me, so I had to take the same kind of stance as you as well, and where do I go? I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. I brought up the issue, I brought up the unconscious, I said the same as you have. I also have committed transgressions in this unconsciously. And I brought up the idea of whiteness, and it was immediately, I was ostracized. I took on the bitch role as being a female as well, bringing this up. And this terrifies me as an educator, that we are sending these people out into the world. And not to say I am not by any way slamming the program here. I do believe that this is an issue that is not brought up enough in teacher education programs. The only way that I was shown the light on this issue was through my intercultural communication course.
Yes.
And that was an option that I had to take for part of my content area.
Yeah.
And so I do feel that this isn't being addressed, and if it's not addressed, I am afraid for the future of the students in education.
And that's an excellent that's an excellent observation and experience, and what you experience is not atypical of throughout the United States in education and even outside of education, where the idea of whiteness is completely alien. In this morning's presentation, I gave the example of the fact that when I get up in the morning and I look in the mirror, I know I'm Asian American. And I ask white students or white participants in workshop, when you get up in the morning and look in the mirror, do you say, geez, I'm white? You don't, because whiteness is the default standards, the norms, the values, the assumptions, and beliefs that are present throughout. You never think of yourself as being different. You think of yourself as being normative more than anything else. Well, people of color see it that it's not normative for them. What a campus climate might be validating to white students, and not all the time, there are many white students who feel what the campus climate may, when it validates whiteness and white standards, it in essence makes it invalidating to people of color. And this is something I've learned in all my training where we talk about race matters and race issues in the classroom. And white students oftentimes complain to me that this isn't safe. You've got to make this safe. Well, I come to the conclusion that actually, that if you make it safe for white students, you perpetuate it, making it unsafe for students of color. And I try to tell them that courage is saying or doing and sharing things not because you're safe, but when you're unsafe. And that's the goal that we work, I have different opinion with people who saying these are the guidelines, ground rules that they set up. The guidelines and ground rules oftentimes come from a perspective that is white Western European, and they are paralytic and inflexible when they are applied to things like racial dialogues. Anyway, thank you very much, and I appreciate your patience.
I wish we could have the rest of the day to have him talk about this topic, because obviously we are scratching the surface. And so it is my hope that we will continue this dialogue, this very important dialogue, in many other types of venues, and hopefully bring Dr. Sue back. Thank you so much for being here. Not very many people know that Dr. Sue took a red eye from New York and got here very late last night, was up very early this morning. We are eternally grateful to you for the message that you have delivered, and we hope that this message will plant a seed of transformation in our thinking and acting at this university. Thank you again.